Steve Bannon was not at the Capitol building on January 6th. He didn't break any laws that day. He's not even accused of breaking any laws that day, but he was Donald Trump's chief political advisor. So today, Steve Bannon was sentenced to nearly half a year in prison by the January 6th committee. Why? Well, because in 2022, the Democratic Party puts its political opponents in jail. That's why. In a moment, Steve Bannon will join us for his first interview since the sentence was handed down. But first, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. It feels like permanent Washington has always hated Donald Trump. But actually, that's not true. For years, Trump was considered merely a joke in D.C., a celebrity sideshow. People were happy to have him to the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And that was true as late as the 2016 primaries. There were still many professional Republicans, people you wouldn't expect, people like Bill Kristol, Joe Scarborough, people who were making highly positive noises about Donald Trump. And then it changed in a moment. It changed on February 13th of that year at the Republican debate in Greenville, South Carolina. That's when Donald Trump criticized the Iraq war. Quote, "Obviously, the war in Iraq was a big fat mistake," he said. And of course, by that point, it certainly was obvious that it was a mistake. But that didn't mean you were allowed to admit it in Washington. You weren't. Thousands of lobbyists, think tank analysts, hack beltway journalists owed their salaries and their reputations to perpetuating the lie that American foreign policy was succeeding. Everything was fine. No one really believed that. The evidence was too strong on the other side, but everyone had to say it. Too many careers were at stake. And yet suddenly, here was Donald Trump refusing to play along, giving away the game in public on TV. The reaction to this in D.C. was violent and immediate. Donald Trump must be stopped. If Donald Trump was going to criticize the Iraq war as a Republican, God knows what else he might say. The Never Trump movement that resulted from that year's South Carolina debate, and that's where it began, that movement went on to do all kinds of things, including subverting the rule of law in this country, as well as entire federal agencies. But one of its first efforts was a little-remembered spoiler campaign designed to siphon votes from Trump in the general election. A group of liberals in Washington, informally headed by Bill Kristol, recruited a longtime federal bureaucrat called Evan McMullin and convinced him to run for president. McMullin didn't seem like a presidential candidate. He was 40 years old, never married, and very obviously odd, very odd. He had no trouble raising money. There were a lot of liberals happy to write him checks. The problem was voters. They were not impressed by Evan McMullin at all. By the end, he won half of 1% of the popular total and 0 electoral votes, and he was soon forgotten, except on Wikipedia. And yet, and here's the point, 6 years later, Evan McMullin has reemerged. He's running for Senate in the state of Utah against incumbent Mike Lee, and amazingly, he could win. He could actually win. Now, if McMullin does win, his vote could very well give Democrats control of the U.S. Senate. How did this happen? How is this possible, you wonder? It doesn't make sense. Utah is a conservative, highly Republican state. Evan McMullin has the same politics and worldview as Pete Buttigieg. He is a liberal Democrat. But he's not running as a liberal Democrat, and that's the key to his success this year. Evan McMullin is running instead as an independent, and many voters appear to be under the impression that he actually is independent. But he's not. That's a lie, a transparent lie. Evan McMullin is roughly as independent as Kamala Harris is. He's considerably less independent than, say, Ilhan Omar. Evan McMullin is anything but independent. He is entirely controlled and has always been. McMullin even uses the Democratic Party's fundraising platform, Act Blue. His campaign has paid nearly $2 million to Democratic Party consulting services in the last year alone. That would include Precision Strategies, co-founded by a Biden advisor. Other firms include Foundation Strategies, Blueprint Public Affairs, and KMM Strategy. These are all partisan Democratic Party firms. In politics, you pick a side in the consultants you hire. And Evan McMullin has picked his side, the Democratic side. Not surprisingly, the creepy liberals at the Lincoln Project, who lie for a living, are busy pretending that Evan McMullin is not one of them. Oh, no. Republicans, they write, Evan McMullin truly represents your values. Really? Which values are those? Does Evan McMullin oppose amnesty for illegal migrants? Does he oppose race-crazed teachers' unions? Does he oppose even Tony Fauci? No, of course not. Evan McMullin is fully on board with every anti-family scheme the Democratic Party has dreamed up over the last decade. As a supposedly faithful Mormon, he can't even acknowledge that Roe v. Wade was a bad decision. He is a neoliberal robot. There's nothing independent about him. Watch him read the Democratic Party's talking points, for example, on abortion.
I am committed to the sanctity of life, but I think that means the lives of women. That means the lives of unborn, of course, and it means the lives of children. And I think we've got to take a more comprehensive approach to that.
But just to be clear, you don't support overturning Roe v. Wade anymore as you did in 2016. I'm just trying to get clarity.
I do not think that is the way for the country to move forward on this issue.
Oh, so keeping Roe v. Wade is the way for the country to move forward. But of course, Roe v. Wade, whatever you think of it, froze everything in amber in 1973 and imposed the most radically pro-abortion regime from the courts on all 50 states. So of course, you can't move forward under Roe v. Wade in either direction. This doesn't make sense. It's effectively pro-abortion. You don't typically hear Mormons talk like that. And in fact, Evan McMullin, as you just heard suggested, did not used to talk like this. In fact, back in 2016, he denounced Donald Trump, the guy who would eventually get Roe v. Wade overturned, because he said Trump wasn't pro-life enough. I'm the only pro-life candidate in the race, McMullin wrote in 2016. 4 years later, after Trump successfully appointed several pro-life justices to the Supreme Court who overturned Roe v. Wade, McMullin has clarified what he means when he says pro-life. Turns out being pro-life has nothing to do with protecting children. Here's what McMullin said, quote, "You aren't actually pro-life if you can't say Black Lives Matter." Oh, right. Black Lives Matter, which is an explicitly pro-choice organization. Are you following all this? It doesn't make any sense. He's a liberal Democrat, and it'd be fine if he ran as one. Utah voters should know what they're voting for, and he should be honest about who he is. If you pay any attention at all to McMullin's last 3 years in, quote, public life, it's very obvious. In 2020, he endorsed Joe Biden because he cares about Republican values. Watch.
For many, choosing between these two Americas will require us to do something we've never done before, crossing party lines to support a unifying presidential candidate of another party. I believe Joe to be an honorable patriot who's loyal to the Republic. And that's why I plan to put country over party and in November, cast my vote for Joe.
He's putting country over party by voting for Joe Biden, who not one time in his entire life has put country over party. So after endorsing Biden for office, and again, lots of people did, that's okay, don't call it independent, Evan McMullin did not act independently. Just the opposite. He proceeded to crib his personal opinions directly from Karine Jean-Pierre and the other geniuses in the White House PR office. There isn't a stupid Democratic buzz phrase he didn't use and then overuse again and again and again. We can give you a million examples. Here's one. Watch him accuse, quote, a majority of House Republicans of voting to overturn the election results.
And then to see that violent, that deadly insurrection happen that threatened our democracy, and then to watch a majority of House Republicans still vote to overturn the results of the election. All of that just describes, of course, a party that is sick, that is rotten to the core.
Okay, so he's an MSNBC contributor. I mean, that's what he is. And if the voters of Utah want to elect one, they should just elect Joy Reid. At least she's not pretending to be something that she's not. And she's also probably a little smarter than Evan McMullin. No one voted to overturn the results of the election, actually, not a majority of House Republicans. What happened is that Republicans did exactly what Democrats did in 1969, in 2001, in 2005, and 2017. Republicans objected to the certification of the results pending an audit. That's what actually happened. We watched. But McMullin doesn't mention 1969, 2001, 2005, or 2017 because he's just repeating talking points he gets from his handlers in the Democratic Party. And he's been doing this for years. Here he is accusing millions of Republican voters of racism.
There's a taboo within the Republican Party about attacking racism in America. And I know that that's the case because when you do it as a conservative, you get attacked by elements within the party. There is an element of the Republican base that is racist.
Yeah, there's a huge taboo in America against opposing racism. We've organized the entire society on a bipartisan basis to oppose racism, but somehow Evan McMullen's the only man brave enough to oppose racism in public. He's also against polio and car crashes. The guy's a moron, but he's false. There are a lot of morons in politics. He's probably not the stupidest person in politics. Mazie Hirono still serves in the Senate, but he's a fraud. If he reminds you of anyone else, a guy pretending to be a Republican so he can undermine his own voters once he gets in office, actually sounds a little bit like Mitt Romney, the other senator from Utah. In a recent debate with Mike Lee, McMullen just came out and said it. Watch.
Senator Romney has worked hard and consistently over the past 3 years. I think it's important. He works with Republicans and Democrats, Senator Lee, to deliver for Utah. And he voted in favor of the bipartisan infrastructure bill that you voted against.
Right. So look, if voters in Utah want to elect a liberal Democrat, if they want to elect another Pete Buttigieg, and if they think that Pete Buttigieg's politics or Evan McMullen's politics represent the politics of the families of Utah, then go ahead and do it. But don't lie. Be transparent. Say who you are. You are a liberal Democrat. So that's the update from Utah. We want to go to New York, where something equally surprising is happening. Something surprising in a good way. So New York is an overwhelmingly Democratic state. No Republican is going to get elected governor of New York, obviously. But this year, a Republican looks like he may be elected governor of New York. Congressman Lee Zeldin is running against Kathy Hochul. She is currently the governor of New York. She's never been elected. She was appointed after they threw the old guy out for some kind of sex crime that no one ever really explained. Hochul has done a lot to make the state even worse, particularly New York City, which is now dirtier and more dangerous than a lot of third world cities, much dirtier and much more dangerous. This year in New York City, robberies are up 34%, felony assaults are up 14%, grand larceny 40%, motor vehicle theft 36%. Murders in the subway system are as high as they've been in a quarter century. So that's the population center of the state that Kathy Hochul runs. Now, before you say, well, maybe she's not responsible for all this, of course she's not responsible for all of it, but she's responsible for the change that made the worst crimes possible, and that would be New York's so-called bail reform law. That law lets criminals out on the street immediately, and Kathy Hochul supports it. Why does she support that? We're not sure, because she will not debate Lee Zeldin. So what is she spending her time doing? Improving New York? Cleaning up the Calcutta-like encampments in Midtown? Actually, they're far worse than anything in Calcutta right now. No, she's not doing anything to make the state better. Instead, she's dividing it and attacking people who are, quote, unvaccinated. Watch this.
I wear my vaccinated necklace all the time to say I'm vaccinated. All of you. Yes, I know you're vaccinated. You're the smart ones, but you know there's people out there who aren't listening to God and what God wants. You know this. You know who they are. I need you to be my apostles. I need you to go out and talk about it and say, we owe this to each other. We love each other. Jesus taught us to love one another. And how do you show that love? But to care about each other enough to say, please get vaccinated because I love you. I want you to live.
This woman's a joke. She's an embarrassment. That might be the most embarrassing tape ever shot of a sitting governor, even an unelected governor. And the truth is, it has done nothing. Sermons like that have done nothing to improve the condition of New York, not in the city and not upstate. And that's why people are leaving New York by the thousands for Florida and Texas and Tennessee. Why? Because it's too expensive, it's too dirty, and above all, it's too dangerous. People are getting hurt by crime. That includes her political opponent, by the way, Lee Zeldin, whose life intersected with crime earlier this year. Someone attacked him during a campaign event. And earlier this month, a gunman opened fire outside his home on Long Island. Watch this.
A gunman opened fire outside the family's Long Island home.
Grazed here, and then the bullet was found right here.
The congressman and his wife were away campaigning, but his daughters were in the kitchen when they heard gunfire. They hid in the bathroom and called for help. Two 17-year-olds outside were shot and took cover in the front yard. The shooter got away. Police say it was a drive-by shooting, not linked to the Zeldins, except for the random location perilously close to where they live.
Yeah, it wasn't linked to them. It could have been anybody. That's kind of the point. Living in New York now is dangerous. That state needs new leadership, and it looks like it's about to get it. As we told you, Lee Zeldin is running for governor. A new poll today, an independent coefficient survey, shows Zeldin leading the incumbent in the race for the first time. Congressman Lee Zeldin joins us now. Congressman, thank you so much for coming on. It's pretty remarkable, not that we didn't have faith in you as a person, but I mean, it's an overwhelmingly Democratic state, and you're now winning the governor's race. First, congratulations. Second, what do you attribute this to?
I mean, you have a governor who's just not doing a good job. She's unlikable. She's corrupt. She's pandering to criminals. She's pandering to tax and spend liberals. She's advancing woke policies as opposed to just focusing on what is most important to New York voters. If she was tackling rising crime, if she was tackling skyrocketing costs, then this might be a different campaign. But here we are talking about how we need to remove district attorneys when they refuse to enforce the law. We don't have recall elections in New York, but the governor does have the constitutional authority to get rid of a DA who refuses to do their job. We're over here talking about the need to get rid of cashless bail and some of these other pro-criminal laws, and we need to support our men and women in law enforcement who are being hung out to dry, getting the handcuffs thrown on them as opposed to putting the handcuffs on criminals. We have a state ban on the safe extraction of natural gas, and now Kathy Hochul wants to get rid of all gas-powered vehicles here over the course of the next decade. We just had the new CDC guidance come out where they're adding the COVID vaccine into their list, and you have a governor who is talking about as a possible consideration. Her past remarks have indicated that maybe she would mandate that for kids, but we already have it being required on college students, and we have people who are getting fired for their refusal to get the COVID vaccine, like our healthcare workers who used to be hailed as heroes, now treated as zeros. I'm somebody who believes that there should be no COVID vaccine on anyone, whether it's grade school, higher ed, employment, or otherwise, and everyone who should be fired, who was fired, should be getting their jobs back with back pay. So the contrast is clear, and even Democrats and independents are saying, you know what, we have to go a new direction in order to save this state. Kathy Hochul has to go, and she will on November 8th.
It sounds like she will. It's just a remarkable story. It kind of comes out of nowhere because, again, it's so overwhelmingly Democratic. It almost seems like she's trying to wreck the state.
Where we are out here campaigning our tails off to earn the support of voters to do our part to save the state, Kathy Hochul right now is crawling across the finish line. She's trying to survive this campaign, and clearly her goal here is to save Kathy Hochul. And the average voter out there in New York hitting their breaking point in the state. Listen, there's a reason why New York leads the entire nation in population loss, Tucker. And I don't even think that Kathy Hochul can finish this sentence that New York leads the entire nation in population loss because. And if you can't finish that sentence, no one's going to ever expect you to actually fix this. And a lot of people pick up on it.
So nicely put. Wow. Congratulations, Congressman Lee Zeldin of New York. Hopefully the next governor. Looks like you will be. Thank you.
Thank you, Tug.
Steve Bannon committed no crimes on January 6th. He was, however, Donald Trump's chief political advisor, and effectively for that, he was just sentenced to prison for refusing to comply with the January 6th committee. Steve Bannon joins us for his first interview since that sentencing. That's next. Steve Bannon had nothing to do with January 6th. He wasn't there. He committed no crime. But that didn't stop the January 6th committee from trying to destroy him anyway. Today, Bannon was sentenced to 4 months in federal prison at the request of that committee. As Congressman Matt Gaetz has pointed out, the Department of Justice official who prosecuted Steve Bannon, a man called Matthew Graves, is a partisan Democrat. He was on Joe Biden's domestic policy committee in the 2020 campaign and worked for other Democratic campaigns. So what we're seeing clearly is the corruption of the rule of law. Congress held Lois Lerner and Eric Holder in contempt famously, but of course they never spent a day in jail, and they were never going to because they were faithful Democrats. Tonight, Steve Bannon joins us for his first interview since his sentencing. Steve Bannon, thanks so much for coming on tonight. Do you agree with Matt Gaetz that this is partisan?
Oh, it's 100%. I mean, the whole Justice Department under Merrick Garland has become radically partisan, and I think that's after we win on November 8th to deliver this crushing blow against the Democratic Party, this regime. Tucker, I strongly believe you'll see Merrick Garland impeached next year by the new Congress.
I certainly hope so. People who say 4 months in prison is not a big deal had never been to a prison. It is a big deal. How are you going to respond to this? Do you plan to submit?
Well, number one, we have the judge laid out today a number of areas of appeal. I've got a great legal team. My legal team is working on the appeals right now. We've got appeals on use of attorney, separation of powers, executive privilege, the structure of the January 6th committee. So we've got a lot of appeals. They'll work through the appeals process, and so this is all my sentencing is all pending the appeals process, and we'll work through it. Like I said on your show the first time, at the end of the day, I got to go to prison by this illegitimate regime. Hey, I respect what the judge did today. I'm prepared to do it, but we got a long appeals process.
What do you think this says about our system more broadly, however? I mean, you're saying that you're being sent to prison because you advised Donald Trump politically. I mean, that doesn't sound like a free country where something like that could happen.
It's not free right now. You see this in whether it's the FBI rolling up individuals praying in front of abortion centers or designating parents, going to parents' rights at school board meetings for parents' rights as domestic terrorists. The Justice Department is completely and totally out of control, and the FBI is out of control. That's why I'm a big believer in defund the FBI. Use the appropriations process to defund both these apparatuses until they come to the table and we start cleaning up the rat's nest. I think the only way you're going to do it is you got to start at the top. We got to impeach Wray and we got to impeach Merrick Garland after full investigations. I think Merrick Garland can be impeached on the southern border. I think he can impeach by what he's trying to do to these parents, the parents' rights movement. I think that Merrick Garland will be impeached next year by the new Congress.
One of the reasons that our system has become partisan and the rule of law is evaporating is because no one's pushing back against it. Are you satisfied with the response from elected Republicans to what's happened to you? Is anyone sticking up for you, do you think?
I think it's fine. And look, elected Republicans, what they need to do now is focus on the 8th of November. Tucker, there's no substitute for victory. We have a very good opportunity here to shatter the Democratic Party as a national political institution, from school boards to state legislatures to attorney general, secretaries of state, to take the House by 40 or 50 seats and maybe take the Senate by 4 or 5 seats. To me, elected officials right now should just focus on winning and winning with the biggest wave we can. I can do this myself with my lawyers. I don't need Republicans to have my back. What I want Republicans to do is, in the new Congress, is to focus on cleaning out the rat's nest at DOJ and cleaning out the rat's nest of the FBI.
If you're Lois Lerner or you're Eric Holder, both of whom committed, from my read, actual crimes against the country, unlike you have not been accused even of doing that, and both of them skated on contempt charges, do you think they're ashamed? Do they see the double standard? Has either one reached out to you to commiserate with you? I'm serious, like on a human level.
No. Look, as you know, the city is so partisan. This process now is so partisan, and they are some of the most partisan people, especially Eric Holder. Eric Holder is the hatchet man for Obama. So, no, they did. And by the way, I wouldn't want them to. Right now, hey, this is an unbridgeable gap. You have the Republicans and the MAGA forces on one side. You have these radical Democrats on another. You see, this is not rule of law. It's like a banana republic. You can't compromise in this. There's no substitute for victory. We have to win massively on the 8th, and then this new Congress has to really go and enforce the rule of law. And the way you enforce the rule of law is start serious investigations, not political, serious investigations, Tucker. And after those investigations, start bringing articles of impeachment and throw these bums out, whether it's Mayorkas at DHS or Garland at the Attorney General, and who knows where it ends.
Yeah, who knows where it ends is right. Steve Bannon, good luck. You don't seem worried. I'd be worried. If I were you. You're a brave man, and I appreciate your coming on. Thank you. Not worried.
Thanks, Tucker. Appreciate it.
So it's looking like Elon Musk will succeed in buying Twitter. Now, this is a huge problem for the Biden administration because Elon Musk has promised to stop censorship on Twitter, and censorship is the only thing that keeps the Democrats in power. So the administration has decided to use the federal government to destroy Elon Musk. Remarkable story. Details next. Increasingly likely that Elon Musk will soon own Twitter, maybe within the next week. And for the Biden administration, this is an existential problem. They cannot tolerate a free and open internet. Censorship is the only thing that allows neoliberal leaders to stay in power. They can't have a debate. They have to shut you down. And so the Biden administration is now finding ways to stop Elon Musk, not to argue against his position, but to crush him with the power of the federal government. They're not even pretending there's a legal basis for doing that. They don't have to. Bloomberg reports that, quote, Biden administration officials are discussing whether the U.S. should subject some of Musk's ventures to national security reviews, including the deal for Twitter and SpaceX's Starlink satellite network. On what grounds, you ask? Well, according to Bloomberg, quote, U.S. officials have grown uncomfortable over Musk's recent threat to stop supplying the Starlink satellite service to Ukraine, for free, by the way. They're also concerned by his plans to buy Twitter with a group of foreign investors, end quote. Oh, foreign investors. Every publicly, every publicly held company in this nation is owned in part by foreign investors. Every single one. And of course, thousands, tens of thousands of acres of U.S. farmland are owned by the Communist Chinese government. But because apparently Elon Musk plans to form some sort of partnership with, quote, foreign investors, maybe the Saudis, he needs a national security review. Don't fall for it. This is about censorship and Elon Musk's promise to end censorship, which is the single worst thing that could happen to the Biden administration, to the Democratic Party, and to the people currently running the country into the ground. They can't have free speech. So on the campaign trail, as you well know, Joe Biden promised to end fossil fuels. Once he took office, he made good on that promise. He canceled oil and gas leases. He shut down a major pipeline. Apparently, the U.S. government helped blow up the pipeline from Russia to Western Europe. I mean, they did. And yet, on Wednesday, Biden insisted that the cost of energy, the rise in it, the unprecedented rise in it, has nothing to do with him. Here's who he blamed.
Because of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, the price of oil and gas increased dramatically. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve is more than half full, with about 400 million barrels of oil. That's more than enough for any emergency drawdown. My message to the American energy companies is this: you should not be using your profits to buy back stock or for dividends. Not now, not while a war is raging. You should be using these record-breaking profits to increase production and refining. Invest in America for the American people. Bring down the price you charge at the pump to reflect what you pay for the product. And the American people will catch a break they deserve and get a fair price at the pump as well.
Well, there are so many lies in that script, we're not even going to attempt to reverse engineer it and correct them. Instead, a man much smarter than we, Victor Davis Hanson, a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, joins us tonight. Professor, thank you for coming on. How do you assess the president's claims about energy?
It's very pathetic. He's trying to square a circle of two things that are incompatible. I mean, he came in here with this green religion, which is God is renewable energy and Satan is fossil fuel. So he canceled Anwar. He canceled Keystone. He didn't push the Constitution pipeline. He has fewer federal leases than any other president. He got his wish, Tucker. He got production down by 2 million barrels, and scheduled increases he canceled. So he got everything he wanted. It was Stephen Chu, the energy secretary's dream. It was Barack Obama's dream when he said electricity would skyrocket as he canceled coal. And then guess what? Inflation came, and there was a spike in demand, and the American middle class is being liquidated because they have to choose between food and fuel, and he wants to be reelected. But being reelected and destroying fossil fuels are incompatible. And the result is this, I guess you'd call it Orwellian paradox, where he goes around the world to the most illiberal regimes, Venezuela, Iran, even Russia before the war, and Saudi Arabia, and his message is, would you please pump this filthy, dirty fuel that we don't like, but we desperately need, and you can do it, but we won't. But you'll do it for our interests. And oh, by the way, we just called you a pariah. Or he goes to the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and he thinks, well, I'm not actually pumping it out of the ground, which I can't do, so I'm pumping it the second time. So if you pump what's already been pumped in, I don't get blamed for it. The green people give me a pass. Or he goes to the oil companies and he thinks, well, yes, I wanted to put you out of business, and yes, I said you're greedy, and yes, I said you're price gouging, and yes, I cut back on your federal leases, but you owe it to me to get reelected to go out and start pumping more fuel that I don't want. And so it's so incoherent that the American people don't even want to attempt to try to understand it. They just don't want him anymore, and it's really hurt him. It's hurt us around the world, and remember, we impeached Donald Trump on the mere allegation that he used national security policy issues for his own political career or agenda. And what is Biden doing? He's dabbling with some of the worst regimes in the world against our national interest to pump a fuel that we have in abundance so that he will do better in the midterm. And I think the American people are furious about this to the extent they can understand it. It's so incoherent.
You got to give him some credit for chutzpah, though, in attacking energy producers for the shortage. I mean, please.
He's shameless. He's very shameless, that's for sure. After really saying that these executives were sort of sinister creatures and price gougers and dabble in this filthy, dirty oil that's warming the planet, now he's saying you have a patriotic duty to ignore everything I've ever said on the campaign trail and pump more of it so I can get my guys reelected. That's the message.
It's unbelievable. Victor Davis Hanson, thank you for that explanation. So smart.
Thank you.
So it looks obvious the Republicans are going to do pretty well on November 8th, but that's not good enough, given how unimpressive so many Republicans are. The good news is that a lot of the Republicans who are going to be swept in on the crest of this wave are legitimately impressive. And one of the most impressive, Joe Kent of Washington State, joins us next. For the first time in memory, really, there are a lot, more than 2 or 3, legitimately impressive people, interesting people, people who think for themselves, people who pay attention to what's going on, people who listen to voters, people like that running for federal office in this cycle, and a lot of them are winning. Maybe not surprisingly, but still thrillingly. We spoke to one of them last night, Carrie Lake. We're going to speak to another one right now. Joe Kent is running for Congress from the state of Washington. He spent 20 years in the Army, and we're happy to have him join us now. Joe Kent, thanks so much for coming on. So it looks like, so you've never been in politics at all. You've never run for anything, as far as I know. You're running on a pretty different platform from the conventional Republican, and you seem to be winning. What about your message do you think is resonating with voters?
You know, Tucker, thanks so much for having me on. I think people are just really sick and tired of the same old establishment talking points. I got into this race because of the failings of our establishment. And when you go out and you actually engage with people and you listen to them, they tell you what affects them the most. And right now, it's inflation, stealing a month of their wages. It's crime at their doorstep. It's their children being sexualized in the classrooms with this perverted ideology. And they frankly had enough, and they want to hear that people are going to listen to them and actually go and fight. I've had a lot of money thrown at me by really both sides of the aisle, and it hasn't been able to take me down because I'm actually going out there and connecting with voters.
Man, they really wanted to stop you. Both sides did. But I wonder why. What you're saying does not sound radical at all to my ears. It sounds very moderate and sensible. Just respond to the basic concerns of voters. Why is that such a threat to so many people?
There's just a narrative right now from our establishment, from this regime of Joe Biden, but then also the entrenched political establishment that really wants the status quo. They want to fight endless wars. We're seeing that with Ukraine. They're willing to risk a nuclear war. They also want our jobs shipped overseas, and they love these open borders. They love the fact that there's essentially anarcho-tyranny in this country right now, and they don't want people who are going to think for themselves and who have an idea of how the system works from the inside. I worked in the military. I worked in the intelligence community. I know the games that these people are running, and I'm going to go to D.C. and stop them.
You do know the games they're running. Maybe that's it. You understand how the system works. But shouldn't they just say that instead of trying to call you some kind of extremist? Again, if you're an extremist, you probably wouldn't have been allowed to carry a gun in the military for 20 years, no?
Yeah, I was good enough to go and fight and die in their wars. I was good enough to hold a high security clearance and to go saddle up for them time and time again. But the second you want to say, hey, now I'm calling the shots, I've paid my dues, I want to help run this country, that's when they come after you. And that's the game. That's the way these people work. And we're just not going to tolerate it anymore. And I think the American people have had enough of that, and they don't even listen to this tired establishment anymore.
So you don't have to name names. I'm just interested. You've gotten a fair amount of publicity in this congressional race. Do you think there are a number of other Republican candidates running in this cycle who share your views?
I really do, Tucker. I think this is going to be a wave year, not just for Republicans, but for America First Republicans who are outsiders. We don't need this. This isn't the thing that we've always wanted to do with our lives, but we're stepping up away from private life, away from service in the military, because we legitimately care and we want to serve our country. I'm seeing that up and down the ballot here in the district, and I'm seeing that throughout the country. So I'm actually, as bad as things are in our nation right now, I'm very inspired and excited to be a part of this new political realignment.
Man, I hope you're right. Your race is certainly exciting. Joe Kent, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much, Tucker.
Hogan Gidley worked in the last White House as deputy press secretary. He's now with the America First Policy Institute. He just had an investigation that found nearly 100 counties across 14 swing states failed to preserve voter data from the 2020 election. Now, that's a violation of federal law. What's worse is that in the few counties studied that did manage to keep their election data, there were discrepancies between the number of people voting and the number of ballots cast. Ooh, that sounds like fraud. Don't say it! You're undermining our democracy by pointing out it's not real. In Miami-Dade County, for example, there was nearly a 2% discrepancy between the number of people who voted and the number of ballots cast. That translates into a difference of more than 15,000 votes in one county. To give you an idea of how bad Miami-Dade's record keeping is, one of our producers, who has not lived in Miami for 15 years, just received a voter card to vote in Miami-Dade County in the upcoming midterm elections. Hogan Gidley joins us now to explain what else he found. This is an amazing story that I guess we're not allowed to talk about. We're going to anyway. Hogan, thanks for coming on. What'd you find?
Thank you so much, Tucker. Look, and the law they're violating is the Civil Rights Act of 1960, which requires these states to preserve and maintain these lists and voter data for 22 months after a federal election. And of course, we did go into these 14 states. We looked at these top most populated counties, 100 of them. Of the 100, only 6 managed to keep any data whatsoever. And it was egregious when we took a look at those numbers, but it gets worse because we also took a look at the numbers of voters who voted and compared that to the number of ballots cast. They didn't match anywhere. And when we asked the officials on the ground, they had no answers. It was absolutely ridiculous. You mentioned the 16,000 in Miami-Dade. That's one county in Florida. Does that matter in a state that big? Well, I don't know. Ask Rick Scott. He won his last election by 10,000 votes. Cobb County, Georgia, one county, we found 34,000 discrepancies. We know the last election there in 2020 was decided by 11,000 votes. You wouldn't let this happen at your bank. If you went in there and gave them $100, the deposit slip should come back and say 100. What if it said 50 or 150? These numbers don't match anywhere. No one can tell us why. This whole thing is a scam. And these laws are being violated across the country. These election officials either stupid, lazy, ignorant, or malicious, and they're violating federal law. It's a serious problem out there, and we have to fix it now. We're working with secretaries of state on the ground to make sure we can get to the bottom of this and make sure they maintain and retain this data for this upcoming federal election. It'd be so much easier to check up on it. Here's the big problem. Even worse, the person and entity that has to actually enforce the 1960 Civil Rights Act is Merrick Garland and the DOJ. Do you think they're going to take their eye off of trying to call parents terrorists for looking into their education of their own children? No way. We're looking for a path forward. We have to make it easy to vote and hard to cheat. By retaining this data, we can take a look at things in real time and potentially prevent illegalities, irregularities, and fraud across this country from happening again.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine an excuse for, 94 out of 100 counties throwing away their voter data when they're not allowed to. I don't think there's a good explanation for that. Hogan Gidley, I appreciate that explanation. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
So Canada, while the rest of us weren't paying attention, has become a dictatorship, and its dictator, Justin Trudeau, has just eliminated the most basic human right of all, the right of self-defense. We have the details. A year ago, the Canadians thought they were living in a free country. They imagined the government couldn't seize their bank accounts without a warrant. They thought they could defend themselves. It all turned out to be untrue. As of today, ownership of handguns is illegal in Canada. Totalitarianism happens fast. Under Justin Trudeau, it has. Let that be a lesson to us. That's it for us tonight. Tune in every night, 8 p.m. Have the best weekend with the ones you love. We'll see you Monday. Here's Sean.